Before we begin, I know this game is old, but I still think it's appropriate to say that there will be spoilers in this video. So yeah, consider this your warning. It's Halloween! My favorite holiday, next to Christmas of course. Other than trick-or-treating or dressing up for costume parties, I also like to celebrate by playing some of my favorite horror-themed games. This year, I've been playing everyone's favorite franchise, Castlevania. But this time, I kinda wanted to take a different approach. Remember when Castlevania went from 2D to 3D? No, I don't mean this one. I mean these two. Castlevania 64 and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Even nowadays, I feel like these games don't garner enough attention like Super Castlevania 4 or Symphony of the Night. Maybe it's because of the weird controls or the change in tone, I don't know. Either way, let's look at these games today. I played as all the characters in both Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness. So we're going to explore both these titles at the same time, check out their differences, and see if they're as bad as some people remember. Welcome to a retro revisit Halloween special of Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness. So out of the long list of Castlevania games, what is Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness? As stated earlier, there were two Nintendo 64 Castlevania games developed. Castlevania 64, which is actually just called Castlevania, it's the fans that added the 64 in the title, and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Now I'll admit that the games were released in a weird way. See, Castlevania was released in early 1999, but due to some time constraints, Konami cut a bunch of content to meet the release date. But they didn't want to stop there, they wanted to release the game that they wanted. So in December of 1999, literally the same year, they released Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Think of it as a director's cut kind of game. It has about 90% of the same stuff as the original title, including previous playable characters and stages. Are we clear on this? You sure? Good, because I'm gonna do my best to explain both games at the same time because they are very similar, so just work with me a little bit. As far as the story goes, the 64 games are considered by some to be a side story or an alternate continuity. They take place in the mid-1800s, and depending on which character you play as, some stories take place before others. So just for a bit more information, the game takes place after Symphony of the Night, but before Bloodlines. Maybe around a similar time as Order of Ecclesia. Now the playable characters are as follows. In Castlevania, you play as two characters. First, there's Carrie Fernandez, a young orphan magician who is actually a descendant of Saifa Belnades. According to Hardcore Gaming 101, Fernandez is just a mistranslation. Carrie's last name is supposed to be Belnades. She goes after Dracula because his forces killed her adopted family. The next character is Reinhard Schneider. Wait, Schneider? Who the hell is this? What happened to the Belmont family? Well, according to some sources, he's like a cousin or some other relative to the Belmont family. It's rumored that his original name was Schneider Belmont, but I have no clue why that was changed. We'll just go with it. Reinhard goes after Dracula mainly because it's part of his family lineage to stop Dracula every time he's resurrected. As far as Legacy of Darkness goes, the first character you play as is a werewolf named Cornell. Basically, Cornell's story is that he went away for training for a year, and upon returning, Dracula's army burned down his village and kidnapped his sister Ada, taking her to his castle. Also, Cornell's opening says that his story set 8 years before Reinhard and Carrie, so his story is a prequel. After you complete the game with Cornell, you unlock Henry Aldry. We'll talk more about him a little later. Afterwards, you unlock Reinhardt and Carrie to play almost the exact same story that took place in Castlevania 64. Between both games, there are a total of 17 stages, but you won't get to explore all of them with Reinhardt and Carrie. They take separate paths later. Only Cornell gets to visit 13 out of the 17 stages, making his playthrough the longest one. Gameplay wise, it's actually pretty simple. You travel through each stage, looking for the exit, battling sub-bosses and main bosses along the way. The problem with this game is one particular aspect: the controls. You think your worst enemy is Dracula? Oh no, not at all. Because the controls and the clunky camera are all over the place. But the worst part has to be the platforming. Seriously, fuck the platforming. Between Reinhardt and Carrie, Reinhardt is a bit slower and doesn't jump high enough, whereas Carrie runs faster and jumps way too high. Cornell lands on a happy medium, but platforming is still a pain in the ass. Another issue is the camera. Listen, I get it. Games during these times were at odd places when it came to 3D cameras. But Jesus Christ, the camera goes all over the place. It can't decide whether it wants to stay behind you or snap somewhere else. There are literally 3 camera options in Castlevania 64 and 2 in Legacy of Darkness, but none of them help. Thankfully with combat, the game can be pretty forgiving. Each character fights with different weapons, so they each stand out. Reinhardt has the famous vampire killer whip and a short sword for close range. Carrie, on the other hand, is just broken. She fires a long-range magic orb that when charged can go and kill from 2 to 3 enemies at once. Kinda like Mega Man X charging his X-Buster. For close range, she uses 2 circular-like blades that wrap around her wrist. Cornell is just weird. Effective, but weird. He slashes the air to unleash a mid-range slash attack and just melees from close. Also, if you played other Castlevania games, the sub-weapons are back. The dagger, cross, holy water, all here. Only this time, your ammo for them are these red jewels, not hearts like in previous titles. Plus, all main weapons get fully upgraded by picking up an upgrade item. Reinhardt gets the best upgrade in Legacy of Darkness, because in the first installment, his whip would only change color when upgraded. But in Legacy of Darkness, the whip goes from a flail to a literal lightsaber. One other difference is that Reinhardt and Carrie get better looking outfits in Legacy of Darkness as well. Now, let's dive into the stages, because while the goal of each stage is the same, many of them play different. In Castlevania, you start off in the Forest of Silence, but in Legacy of Darkness, you start on a boat on your way to the Forest of Silence. This level is pretty straightforward to get you used to the controls because you're gonna need to. But either way, let's start with Cornell since he's first in the story anyway. In Legacy of Darkness, you get to see Dracula's minions resurrect him, and Cornell gets a nice action-oriented opening. The skeleton falling here cracks me up all the time. From the get-go, you can already see the difference between both games. The camera in Legacy of Darkness is closer and tighter to the character, but I think it's too close, and it still doesn't help much. But anyway, from the boat, we make our way to the Forest of Silence, which has a different layout in Legacy of Darkness. We pull a few levers, open a few gates, and fight this giant skeleton with other skeletons and motorcycles. Yes, motorcycles. I don't care how cheesy this looks, this is hilarious. Afterwards, we're off to the castle wall. This is where you really notice the difference in the tone from other Castlevania games. The music alone is atmospheric and portrays an unsettling feeling with the environment. And I think that's the main distinction from other Castlevania games. Other games were more action with fast-paced music. The 64 games wanted to give you the more survival horror feel without actually being a survival horror game. But back to the castle wall. You make your way up 2 areas of the stage, fight a 2-headed dragon boss, and then get a cheap threat from Dracula. From there, it's stage 3, which has one of my favorite areas in the entire game. This stage has 2 areas, the garden maze and the villa. From the start, you're fighting some fire-breathing Cerberus dogs, and you make your way to the entrance of the villa. It's the villa that is my favorite area in the entire game. Unlike the other stages, the villa shows a part of the castle that is a livable space. And it also conveys that atmospheric tone with the music again. This is also an area where you meet some key characters. Cornell meets the Audrey family, where the father of the family is trying to sacrifice his wife and son to Dracula, and the wife asks Cornell to take Henry to safety. Remember Henry Aldry? Yep, that's the same character you play as, but again, we'll get to him a little later in the video. With Reinhardt and Carrie, you meet Rosa, a vampire that tends to the rose garden by watering the roses in blood. Oh, and fun fact, during Cornell's playthrough, the roses are actually white because Rosa hasn't watered them yet. Another NPC you meet is Renan, a demon who sells you items because, as he says, one needs gold even in hell these days. Apparently, even hell has capitalism. Also, you meet Charles Vincent, a boomer vampire hunter that is just decked out in anti-vampire gear, and occasionally takes a nap on the job. Now comes the worst part of this stage, the garden maze. First off, with Reinhardt and Carrie, you meet the sussy kid named Malice, who says he's lost so you gotta help him out of the maze. Only God knows how he got there in the first place. And funny enough, it's not the maze part that's the problem, it's the fact that it turns into a chase scene. You see, with Cornell, Reinhardt, and Carrie, you have to run from a Frankenstein-looking monster that has a chainsaw grafted into one of his arms. Even worse, he's accompanied by these two mutts that latch onto you so he can cut you down. I died so many times here, but I did my best to hold my patience. You end up jumping around like a maniac while trying to find the exit at the same time. But you find it eventually. So finally you reach the end, and you get to a boss fight with a couple of vampires. And then here's where everyone goes their separate ways. Cornell goes to the outer wall, Reinhardt goes to the underground tunnel, and Carrie ventures through the sewers. I think we're supposed to assume that Reinhardt and Carrie have been traveling together up until this point. Now, of these three separate stages, the hardest one has to be Carrie's. The sewers is the perfect example of bad level design. You're surrounded by poisonous water left and right, with narrow walkways and lizard men trying to knock you off while spitting poison at you at the same time. And you can't fall, not once, or it's instant death and back to the last save point. Which reminds me, even if it wasn't poisonous water, no one can actually swim, so you will go back to the save points if you fell either way. Afterwards, and aside from the outer wall, Cornell gets 2 extra stages, but we'll skip over those since they're just some puzzle solving and more annoying platforming. Now let's get to the main reason why you guys showed up for this video. Yeah, I know why you're here, the infamous Castle Center stage. But let me get this out of the way first. The level design for this stage is actually pretty damn good. Most rooms look different, and there's a lot to explore here. Plus, the music is the opening menu music, but an extended version. Now, that's not to say that this stage doesn't have any flaws. It also has 2 puzzles to solve, but the biggest problem is the famous Nitro and Mandragora puzzle. Yeah, I know you have PTSD with this one. Basically, what you have to do is, you gotta find 2 ingredients to create a bomb for certain walls so they can explode and create the path forward. And this is going to result into a lot of backtracking because one item is on one side of the stage while the other is on another floor which is on the other side of the stage. But either way, the ingredients are the Mandragora and the Nitro, and you can only carry one at a time. The Mandragora is easy. Get the key from this guy that wants to help you for some odd reason. Grab the Mandragora and place it on the broken wall nearby. Simple, right? Well, now prepare to get fucked by the long bell-mount whip of the law because the Nitro is another freaking story. Once you pick up the Nitro, you can only walk, run, and attack in place. If you fall, get hit, or jump with the Nitro, it'll explode and it's game over and back to the last save point. So prepare to see this a lot. Now here's another small but fun fact. A common mistake players made was when trying to place the Nitro or the Mandragora on the ground, they would try to select it from the in-game menu. And when they saw that they couldn't, they thought it was either like a bug or they made some sort of mistake. When in reality, all they had to do was press, I believe was the right C button on the controller to interact with the broken wall and place the item down. I don't know, I always thought that was funny. But anyway, and finally, when you've offed yourself so many times, you can solve the other puzzle in the planetarium to release the seal on the first floor. Apparently you can do this puzzle like a little earlier, but whatever, I survived. And just so you guys know, I have the strategy guide for this game. But for this stage, I put it away, just so that I can feel the same pain you all felt. So feel free to thank me in the comments, and tell me about your experience in the castle center. Afterwards, you fight some undead bull boss that blows up unexpectedly with about 25% health left, and then it turns into literal beef. Actually, let's see that again. I love it. He's pretty easy. Since there's no dodging mechanic, you can just run around and jump to avoid some attacks and hit it when there's an opening. Which is basically the same strat for all the bosses in this game. Keep in mind that this stage is exclusive to Reinhardt and Carrie, and they each have their own second boss before leaving. I'll explain these story elements closer to the end of the video. Okay, so we're closer to the end, and everyone goes their separate ways again. Reinhardt fights his way through the Duel Tower, which is basically a boss rush with some platforming. And then he's off to the Tower of Execution. This stage just looks awesome, with the swinging blades and the lava pit below you, plus the music is pretty fitting too. With Carrie, you visit the Tower of Science and the Tower of Sorcery. These are by far the worst stages in the entire game. The Tower of Science is full of machine guns and weird camera angles. But the Tower of Sorcery? My god, this is the definition of annoying. I don't know how the developers can see that the platforming is the weakest element of this game, and yet they still decided to make an entire freaking stage based solely on platforming. I mean, look at this! Oddly enough, with Cornell, he actually visits all of the tower stages, which means he also has to deal with the annoying platforming in the Tower of Sorcery. Now, depending on who you're playing as, the final boss of this stage will change. Reinhardt will fight Death, Cornell will fight Ortega, and Carrie will fight Actrice. Again, we'll go over all these guys soon. Finally, welcome to the second to last stage, and if you played almost any Castlevania game, then you know that reaching the clock tower means that you got one level left before fighting Dracula. But we're gonna go past this one too, because it's just more annoying platforming with several "you died" screens. And now, here we are, the home stretch. As you know, a lone stairway means Dracula is waiting for us at the top. But just a couple of things happen first. Renan appears in the first room in the staircase. If you bought 30,000 gold or more worth of items, he'll challenge you to a boss battle. But I never bought that much, so he just said goodbye to me and went back to the free market of the damned. Additionally, if you're playing as Reinhardt or Carrie, I'm going to point out what I believe to be the biggest flaw in these games. Remember Vincent, the boomer vampire hunter? Well, he is actually the key to unlocking the true ending. Yes, Reinhardt and Carrie have true endings. In these titles, there's an in-game clock and a day and night cycle. Plus, there's also some doors that only open during the daytime or the nighttime, and you can move the clock forward using the sun or moon cards. So what the hell does all this mean? Basically, if you take too long to play the game, Vincent becomes a vampire. If you use, I think it's about 4 sun and moon cards in total, that means you took too long. Also, other sources say that if you spend about 16 in-game days to play, then yeah, you basically took too long. And in my opinion, I think that kind of kills some of the exploration aspect of this game. Even though the game does give you a proper amount of time to explore, to look around, some gameplay, etc., you can't help but internalize the fact you are kind of feeling like a little bit rushed. So again, if you take too long, yeah, Vincent becomes a vampire. I'll explain a little bit of what exactly that means, but funny enough, it almost seems like all that gear he's wearing is basically for nothing. Thankfully, Cornell's playthrough doesn't have the same flaws. Let me know how you think about this in the comments. But anyway, when you finally reach the top of the staircase, it's time to take on Dracula. This fight is reminiscent of past Castlevania games where his head is the weak spot. Plus, his famous boss theme, Dance of Illusions, played during the battle. Now, if you're playing with Cornell, you get Dracula's second form, and then you win the game. With Reinhardt and Carrie, you have to attempt to escape the collapsing castle. But as you escape, Malice appears, and surprise surprise, he's actually Dracula in disguise. The other one was a decoy. Actually, this new Dracula looks sorta familiar. Once you defeat this form, he's easier than he looks. He reverts back to being a boy, begging you to help him, saying that Dracula is controlling him. Now this is where Vincent comes in. If you didn't spend too much time playing, he'll appear and throw holy water at Malice, saying that he won't fall for his lies. And lo and behold, the son of a bitch saved the day because Malice was indeed lying. Because from there he transforms into his final form, a literal dragon. This battle can be a little tough, but just run around and jump to avoid some attacks and you should be fine. Now I know I jumped around the story a bit, but I wanted to get the gameplay out of the way first, so let me explain. Cornell first appears in Legacy of Darkness with a prequel story. As stated before, his sister was kidnapped and he goes to rescue her. While doing so, every now and then he encounters his old friend Ortega, who has fallen for the desire to become a more powerful werewolf and joins Dracula's forces. You encounter him throughout the game until you finally battle him closer towards the end. Upon being defeated, Ortega admits that he was the one that burned down Cornell's village and regrets his wrongdoings. Afterwards, he starts to lose control of his power and throws himself off the side of the castle. Eventually, Cornell fights and defeats Dracula, but Dracula tries to take his sister down with him. Cornell sacrifices his wolf form to save Ada, which was Dracula's plan all along. The plan was to basically lure Cornell to the castle so they can steal his wolf form and use that to revive the true Dracula, which is basically Malice. Once Cornell's story is over, we can now play as Henry. Yeah, that's right, we can finally talk about this guy. The story is told that in 1852, Carrie and Reinhardt are storming the castle, and during that time, Henry, who is now an adult, is sent by the church to save some kidnapped kids. On a quick note, Henry attacks with a very strong OP pistol and a short sword. It's rumored that his design was from another character that was cut named Collar? Whatever. But I haven't found anything that fully confirms that yet. Personally, I think Collar looks more like a mix of Henry and the Chainsaw Frankenstein monster from the Garden Maze, but I digress. Either way, the reason why I kept glossing over Henry is because he doesn't have much of a story. He's mainly used to unlock content. To summarize, all you have to do is find 6 kids in about 7 days, and each kid you find is something you unlock, like an alternate outfit for a character. If you find all the kids, you unlock Reinhardt and Carrie. Quick warning, some of the children can be kinda hard to find. But that's it. Once you find the kids, the game just ends. At least there's a fun Castlevania jingle every time you find a kid. Next up, let's discuss Reinhardt. Cause honestly, his story didn't impress me too much. It's basically, this is my lineage, so I must fight Dracula. The Rosa storyline, on the other hand, is a little better because she shows some regret for being a vampire. At one point, she even tries to end her own life by stepping into sunlight, but Reinhardt stops her. She even becomes a human in the end, so her story is more fleshed out. Now in case you haven't noticed, yeah, Carrie's my favorite character. And no, it's not because she's broken. Her story just seems more refined to me. Throughout her playthrough, the witch actress taunts her and asks her to think about joining Dracula's army. Later in the castle center, Actrice asks her again, but Carrie refuses. Because of her refusal, Actrice sends a vampire to attack Carrie, who is actually Carrie's cousin. Later in the game, when you reach the clock tower, you have one last interaction with Actrice before fighting her. In that conversation, Actrice admits that she cares about no one but herself, as she sacrificed her own child to Dracula to gain the power that she has now. This puts Carrie in a sentimental moment, where she admits that even though she was adopted, she loved her mother. And she knows that her stepmother loved her before she was murdered, and calls actress pathetic for not showing her daughter the same love. At the end, after Carrie witnesses Dracula's castle crumble, she visits her mother's grave, and even though no words are spoken, this can be interpreted as Carrie telling her mother that she's been avenged and Carrie can finally move on. Now keep in mind that all of this is the good ending. The bad ending is that if you take too long, Vincent can't help you, and you help Malice escape the castle. Thankfully, I never got the bad ending. All jokes aside, I honestly love this game. Are there better Castlevania games? Of course there are. I think the handheld games like Order of Ecclesia and Portrait of Ruin, they have better gameplay. But it's still interesting to see Konami's first attempt at a 3D Castlevania game, and despite the flaws, I still enjoyed playing both of these titles. Between their different tone and bold ambition, they still stand as two of my favorite titles, even though they piss me off sometimes. But hey, thanks for watching. If I have more time, I might do another video before Halloween, but we'll see. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones. And follow me on social media. I do my best to update everyone as often as I can. Have a good one, thanks for watching, and happy Halloween!